else. Former Chief Secretary to the Treasury, David Gauke, has told Andrew Marr financial institutions might be reluctant to lend to the government in future.
The problem for the government is if it sends out too many reassuring pieces of news to Labour MPs and to Labour voters, is that what is heard by the bond markets is, in the end, they'll bend to public opinion. They're not tough enough to bring borrowing down, and that we may see problems in the markets. If she's unlucky, I think there's a chance that might happen.
The Chancellor has also told LBC that she has no intention of repeating tax rises on the scale of last year's budget at next week's spending review. Donald Trump has revealed details of his phone call with Vladimir Putin, which lasted an hour and 15 minutes. The US president says his Russian counterpart has vowed to respond to Ukrainian drone attacks on air bases inside Russia. He didn't reveal whether he tried to deter Mr. Putin. Police in Portugal say a body has been found in the search for a missing British man who disappeared a week ago. 38-year-old Greg Monks from Glasgow was last seen in Albufeira on a stag do. LBC's correspondent in Scotland, Alan Zazinski, has been reading a statement from Portugal's judicial police force.
They say that after investigating the presumed route he had taken in the early hours of the day he went missing, they have now located his body on what they describe as vacant and very uneven terrain in the Cerro de Aguia area. Now, what Greg was doing in that area, suburbs on the hilly outskirts of the city, miles away from where he left friends on the strip, remains a mystery. He was only placed there through CCTV images.
The Prime Minister says he will continue to look at further action against Israel after it paused food deliveries to aid distribution sites in Gaza. Sir Keir Starmer has described the country's recent actions as intolerable. Israel has accused Hamas of stealing the supplies after declaring the roads leading to the centre's combat zones. UNICEF spokesperson James Elder spoke to Andrew Marr from Khan Yunis and called the situation one of great despair.
People just spend their days in quote-unquote survival mode, Andrew. They spend their days looking for food and, of course, quite often being evacuated. So for the UN, it remains that push to get the humanitarian aid in like we were allowed to during the ceasefire.
A father and son have appeared in court accused of murdering a 4-year-old boy in a car crash in Kent. 2 pickup trucks collided in Dartford on Sunday. 53-year-old Patrick Maughan and his son, 27-year-old Owen Maughan, are due back in court later this week. And HMRC have revealed it's lost £47 million after a cyber attack on tens of thousands of tax accounts. The tax office says 100,000 people have been contacted or are due to be contacted after their accounts were locked down. Its chief executive says taxpayers will suffer no financial loss as a result. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 14 points at 88.01. The pound buys $1.35 and €1.18. LBC weather, rain pushing in from the west tonight across southern and central areas. A few scattered showers further north, a low of 4. A cloudy and wet start in England and Wales tomorrow. Heavy rain in places will clear later to leave sunny spells and showers. Staying cloudier in Scotland and Northern Ireland, a high of 20 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and welcome to the programme. It's Iain Dale on LBC between now and 10 o'clock. Now, this hour of the programme, we are streaming live on Global Player and the new LBC app because we have with us the leader of the Lib Dem, Ed Davey, and he's going to be taking your calls. If you have a burning question that you'd like to ask him, the number 0345 6060 973. Well, Ed, welcome. I don't think we've done a proper interview, like lengthy interview, since the election. So nearly a year. Where have you been?
Well, I've been here, there and everywhere. I've been writing books. Just want to get that in nice
here we
and
are.
early.
Let's get the book plug in first, shall we?
It's Why Care Matters, and it's my attempt to make sure care doesn't drop off the political agenda. I tell my story as a carer, and then there are 4 carers telling their stories because I think care is a issue that affects millions of people, and I want to bring in other voices. And then I talk some about the policy stuff at the end. And not only can you buy it, but I hope it engages policymakers. I was very pleased that Louise Casey came to my London launch. Louise is chairing the Social Care Commission set up by the Prime Minister. Unfortunately, he said it doesn't have to report for 3 years, and I think the issue is that much more urgent, and that's part of what I'm saying in the book.
I hate to tell you that my book has just overtaken yours on Amazon.
Only just, but we'll catch you on.
Right, we'll come to calls in a very short time, but I do want to ask you a couple of questions first. I said to a friend of mine today, I was interviewing you, and I said, OK, give me a question. He said, why on earth should I give a rat's arse about the Liberal Democrats? Because they've disappeared from view since the election.
Well, I don't think that's true. I think the 72 MPs that we now have, the largest Liberal Democrat force for over 100 years, we've been making our voice heard in the chamber of the House of Commons, in lots of media outlets and in the communities that we now represent. And I think, for example, we have been the ones in the opposition party championing health and care. No other opposition party is doing, and that's fundamental to so many people. But I think we've been the one criticising Donald Trump, for example, the only party doing that. So we've got very distinctive positions on key issues of the day.
I think what he meant by that was that, have you had any actual impact on changing people's minds, changing the government's minds? Nigel Farage is getting all of the... I mean, if you look at the three opposition, or say four opposition parties, including the Greens, but if you look at all of them, Nigel Farage is garnering most of the headlines because he's coming up with... Well, he says something interesting, whether you agree with it or not. He's always got a punchy line, a bit like Donald Trump in some ways. And they say the only way that you ever get media coverage is if you do a stunt.
Well, listen, it is true that if you say things that divide people, and there are, I would say, on the more hard side, extreme side of political opinion, then you get more coverage because people say, well, that's pretty out there. And I'm really proud that my party holds the values that I think are more central to British values. I don't want to change our values just to get public opinion.
No, but you would describe yourself as a radical, so therefore you can say some radical things which ought to capture the public's imagination rather than having to resort to a series of stunts.
I've given you two examples where we are leading the agenda. I think they're really important. I think care, unless we sort out family care and social care, we won't sort out the NHS. Who's saying that? We're the only ones saying that. I've even written a book about it. And Donald Trump has massively changed global politics. Who is the one party who's saying we should be tougher on Trump and we should not follow what the Prime Minister's doing or the subservience, frankly, of Nigel Farage and the Conservative Party? It's the Liberal Democrats. So I think we have taken radical positions on a domestic issue and on an international issue. But I'm really proud of that.
I remember I'm sure somebody wants to ask you about Donald Trump, but let me just ask you one quick question, then we'll go to a call. I remember on the day that the so-called trade deal was announced, and we can argue about whether it was a real trade deal or not, but it was a deal of some sort, which will benefit the country. And I thought, well, Keir Starmer shot Ed Davey's fox there, because although Ed Davey has been very outspoken on Trump, and I understand why, if Ed Davey had been Prime Minister with that attitude, you would not have got that deal, would you?
Well, I don't think the deal is very good. First of all, the tariffs that he agreed with Trump were worse than we had before Trump. So I don't think many people in the British economy are going, hooray, we've still got a worse deal. And secondly, we've seen in the last day or two that deal looks like it's unravelled. You know, the Prime Minister tried all these different things. He thought he'd got 0% tariffs for British steel. Trump's now saying they're going to do 50% unless you meet my new deadline. So I don't think you can trust Trump, and that's my point. I don't think he's a reliable ally. And what I was doing is saying, look, there are other deals available. You don't have to deal just with the US. You've got our Commonwealth allies.
But 20% of our trade is with the US. So
more of our trade is with the EU. I'm not saying it's not important. Of course it's important. I would like to do a trade deal with the US, but I want to do one from a position of strength. I think the Prime Minister's been doing it from a position of weakness. And so we will disagree on this one. I think a customs union with the European Union and deals on trade with our Commonwealth partners in Asia like Korea and so on, would be much more valuable.
Okay.
Enable us to go to Trump and say, we don't need you and we're not going to bow to you.
Let's go to a first call. It's from Ray in Whitstable. Ray, good evening. What would you like to ask Ed?
Well, I'd like to ask Ed about his policy to reinstate the winter fuel to every single pensioner. Now, I am a working class pensioner. I am neither rich nor poor. My wife and I are comfortable. We do not need the winter fuel. And the vast majority of pensioners do not need it. So why should our children and the general taxpayer give money to rich pensioners who do not need it?
So it's your policy that you're just going to reinstate it as it was before?
Yeah, we think with the high energy bills that are having to be paid, particularly by pensioners who often stay in their homes for more hours a day than people who are not retired, that it is a sensible support for them. And for the Labour government to come in and to take it away when energy bills are going up, I thought was completely wrong. So I'm sorry, Ray, that we're going to disagree on this, but I think with high energy bills, this is the right approach to keep winter fuel allowance. Actually, I don't know, you've seen the news today, Ray. Not only are the Conservatives having the same policy as us, but the Labour Party look like they're moving, look like they're changing and U-turning under the
But not
the
quite
pressure.
sure what to.
But we don't know the details.
No.
You're absolutely right. We'll eventually.
But Ray's got a point here, hasn't he? Because there are many pensioners. I mean, if you look at the demographic of pensioners versus sort of working people and then younger people, pensioners are the richest area of our society in general. There are lots of poor pensioners, but there are lots of rich ones too. Would it not be better to have some sort of means test where you have a cut-off point of maybe the 40% tax bracket? When you move into that, you don't get the winter fuel allowance, or even higher than that. And then if there is money, then you pay more money to people who are worse off. So people at the bottom end really benefit much more.
Well, first of all, at the bottom end, you're right. And there is something called a warm homes discount, which I pushed up when I was Energy Secretary. I think it's really important. And the government, to be fair to them, have done just that. So you're right at the bottom end, but actually the warm home discount does that. At the top end, listen, if the government's going to come to Parliament and say, we'll give winter fuel allowance back to everybody but people on higher rate tax, I think, well, let's have that debate. I'm really open for that debate. The problem they'll face is that, first of all, they won't raise very much money, and they said that was why they were doing it. And secondly, there's quite a cost of administering this thing. And we had to face this when we said that child benefit couldn't be taken by people who had incomes, I think it was over 60,000.
Yep.
But actually, that saved a huge amount, even despite the extra administration costs. I think if they did what you were suggesting, and I'm open for debate, the administration cost to get back quite a small amount of money, I think people would say, is it really worth it?
OK, thank you very much indeed for your question, Ray. Let's move on to John in Wallington. John, what's your question, please?
Good evening, Ian. It's Ed.
Hi.
Yeah, my question is, Ed, when are you going to accept that we've left the EU? And given the geopolitical situation, we should be in lockstep with the United States of America. They're the most powerful military in the world. Okay, and we need them now more than ever. We should be as close to them as is humanly possible. And being outspoken about President Trump is doing Britain a disservice.
Well, John, I respect your views, but I have to candidly say I don't agree with you. But let me answer your first question before I come to the geopolitics and President Trump. We have said that the idea of going back into the European Union in any early stage is clearly not true. We've said
early stage.
Well, we've said in our manifesto that in the long term we would like to be back in the centre of Europe, but we're not proposing that in our manifesto.
But do you mean 2030s, 2040s?
Well, I mean, I think first of all you've got to rebuild the trust. I mean, the trust between ourselves and our European partners has really been destroyed, and I very much regret that. And I think you have to take small steps, and the steps that we've taken are actually rather larger than the Prime Minister and Labour government. For example, we would like to have a new customs union. I'm very happy to talk about that.
When you say a new customs union, do you mean going back into the EU customs union, or do you mean some sort of separate arrangement?
It would have to be separate because you wouldn't be part of the European Union, so by definition it would have to be separate. But other non-European Union countries have customs union agreements with the EU, and that's the sort of thing, and you would negotiate it on the terms. We'd have specific terms that we would want to negotiate.
But would one of your terms be that we would still have the right to negotiate our own trade deals?
We would need to be able to work with the European Union to negotiate trade deals. So I'd look at it at a different angle. I had the real privilege of being the trade minister when we were in the EU, and we negotiated a fantastic deal with Korea. Really beneficial. We're the first big trading bloc to do that. So you can do that within the EU.
But earlier you were saying you wanted a new trade deal between us and Korea. We have the same trade deal with Korea as the EU does because it was rolled over.
Indeed it was.
But the way that we are at the moment, we can improve that like we did with Japan.
But you can improve that in the EU too. There's nothing to stop us. The EU indeed is negotiating with many other countries, and one of the advantages in the EU is you've just got so much bigger market to offer. You have a bigger chance of getting a better trade deal. I mean, the Prime Minister, to be fair to him, has got some trade deals. They've not been that impressive. I mean, they're better than nothing, but they're not really serious trade deals in the way that I think we really need.
But they are trade deals that the EU hasn't got. And part of the argument that Brexiteers put forward during the Brexit campaign was, well, the EU could talk about trade deals, but they take so long to come about. And I mean, they haven't got one with America. We have, of sorts. I mean, we can agree that it is of sorts. Well, maybe, but I mean, out of small acorns grow big oak trees.
Potentially.
Hopefully. But if we were to go down the road you're suggesting, we would have no independence on trade deals whatsoever. And I think that's a really difficult sell to a lot of the population.
Well, I don't think it would be when they look at the facts, but since we've left the European Union, our trade deals have either just been rolled over in the way that you rightly described, or they've been trade deals which, frankly, I'm really quite disturbed about. The trade deal that the last Conservative government negotiated with Australia, for example, I don't think it was a great deal at all. And if you look at the EU, you said they don't have trade deals. They've got other trade deals that we haven't got. They've got a trade deal with a whole series of Latin American countries, for example. We haven't got that. And they've got, I think, for many of the parts of that trade deal, a very effective one. So actually, if you're part of a bigger trading bloc, guess what? You can get a better deal. But here's the point. In the customs union, that is a trade deal. Right? At the moment, we don't have that trade. The trade deal that Boris Johnson negotiated was a dreadful trade deal. It's cost our businesses loads of money. I have firms in my constituency who can't trade and have given up trading, just completely given up trading in Europe because of the paperwork, the cost, the bureaucracy. A customs union would be the best way of restoring that.
But according to Keir Starmer, the deal that he reached, was it on May the 19th, will eliminate a lot of this paperwork.
It won't.
Well, I don't think it will either, but that was the claim that was made.
Well, you and I agree on that. I think his claim is just wrong. Can I just actually come back to John's question from the phone? I'm happy to keep...
No, keep going.
John, you asked about the EU. I hope I've answered that question, but then you went on to say we should be cozying up to the United States under President Trump, and that was the geopolitical sensible thing to do. I have been someone who've always valued the transatlantic relationship. Indeed, at different stages of different presidents whose politics I may not have agreed with, I valued that and thought it was really important, particularly for our security and defence. The problem you've got at the moment is the present incumbent at the White House, his approach to defence and security, I think, is extremely alarming. The way he's sided with Russia and Putin in the Ukraine battle, the way he seeks to undermine NATO, I think is deeply troubling. I don't think he's the reliable ally that we've had over many years. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try and work with him, by the way. Of course, we should try to work with him. But I think it's a wake-up call for Europe and our Commonwealth allies to up our game on defence. So the Democrats have been very strongly in the favour of trying to have a coalition of the willing, a military coalition of the willing, that, yes, if the United States want to be part of it, fine, but even if they don't, we work with our European countries, our Commonwealth allies, to make sure we can stand up to Putin and support Ukraine. And I think that is the sensible thing to do for the defence of our country.
OK, more calls to come. John, thank you for yours. 0345 6060 973. We've got a lot of calls coming in. If you don't get through first time, do keep trying. It's 7:20.
This is LBC. Iain Dale. Text 84850. This is LBC.
Doing that.
22 minutes past 7. We have the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davey, in the studio asking questions. Lots of them coming in. Let's go to Jane in Hayes. Hello, Jane.
Hello, Ian. Hello, Ed.
Hi, Jane.
I was just wondering your opinion. I was a Remainer, and I was devastated the next morning after the votes. But I have actually sort of over the years just thought, well, we just need to knuckle down and get on with it and do the best we can. And I was really sort of disillusioned also, and I suppose I felt that Barnier and even Macron were just so awkward at letting us get anywhere. I know that some of the arrangements, like you said, some of the agreements that Boris did and other people did, Theresa May as well, were not great. But also, I just was disillusioned with it, and I'm now thinking we're in a spot. You know, we've got a very volatile relationship going on in America, and the EU want us back. They want our time. They want they're cozying up to Starmer, being ever so nice, and yet 2 or 3 years ago they weren't. They were very hostile towards us, very offish, very standoffish, leaving us out of talks. Now they want, now that the whole world has changed and they need us, they need our army, they need our money, they're very interested in having us back on board. I wonder how
what's your question, Jane? Okay, fine.
I wonder how you feel about that. Do you not feel that they're interested now, whereas they weren't before, and they're still interested on their terms only?
I think when you have the sort of break of a relationship that Brexit represented, I think it does leave some, bad feelings, and they take some time to get over. I hear what you say, Jane, about it seeming that there's a better relationship between Keir Starmer and some of the European politicians. I don't get a sense, though, from my conversations that they want us back, I have to say. I think they are not sure if Britain, in its heart, wants to be back. And,
I think Jane is really interesting there, because I hear this quite a lot from people who did vote Remain and don't regret voting Remain. But they think, well, we're out now, and we have to make the best of it. And I don't like the way that we were treated by. I mean, she's mentioned Barnier and Macron. I mean, and in a way, their attitude was understandable at the time. But all the polls show that if there were a referendum tomorrow, that people would vote to go back. So it's quite a difficult one to gauge.
It is. I mean, and I've thought about this a lot. I've talked to quite a lot of people, and I accept that there's no way you can go back, tomorrow. I mean, of course, that's not possible. What I think
in your lifetime?
I don't know. But what I do think we should do, because I don't think it's a good thing, particularly with a very insecure world, with what Donald Trump is doing to trading around the world, for us not to be on good terms with our European neighbours. Now, you don't have to be a member of the European Union to be on good terms, but you do need to work at that relationship, whether it's France or Germany, Italy, all the countries who are our close neighbours and still big trading partners, and I think could be bigger. I think we do need to engage with them. And I think there's a whole series of ways we could have mutually beneficial cooperation. I mentioned the customs union. I've talked about, I think it'd be a good idea to have a youth mobility scheme for younger people. I think you could look at some of the arrangements that Boris Johnson and Tories took us out of that didn't make sense. I mean, for example, things like medicines and aviation, which you can actually get a lot better deal at a lower cost by working with others.
But on mobility, that is a good example. I think Jane would probably agree with this, where I don't think virtually no Brexiteer that I know thinks that's a bad thing to have a youth mobility scheme. But when you look at the detail of what the EU wanted or were offering, it was totally iniquitous, that they wanted our young people to only have access to one country and their young people from all 27 to have access to ours, and they didn't want a cap, and you can see how that wouldn't work. So the government had to stand up to that, didn't it?
Well, I would want to stand up to it. We want to negotiate a best deal for our young people and for our country. Of course I would. And that's the job of the UK government, and certainly the Democrats would take this approach of getting the best deal for us, whether it's on youth mobility or all these other issues.
But that's why they didn't do a deal at that summit, which everyone was expecting.
Well, neither you or I at the summit, I don't know exactly what was said or what wasn't said. What I do know is there's a whole range of issues where we can cooperate better than we have been doing, that's in the interest of businesses, interest of students, in the interest of holiday makers. And I want to see us engaging with our European colleagues, rebuilding that trust, rebuilding that relationship, because we are neighbours, we live in the same street, we might have had a fallout, but I think it'd be better to patch that relationship up in many, many ways.
OK, Sarah's not pleased with me. She says, no pushback by Iain when the caller says Boris's deal was bad, pathetic bias and lack of journalism. Well, I don't believe it was a particularly brilliant deal. I think it was the only deal that he could get because, as Jane said, the EU were determined, if not to punish us, to make it as difficult as possible. And you have to understand that was where they were coming from. But this is Ed's hour. It's not my hour, so I'm not going to push back on things that caller say. I'll leave that to Ed to do if he wants to.
I think it was a very bad deal, but let me say I'm sorry, Sarah.
Right, Jane, thank you. Let's go to Carl in Newcastle. Not Cole's in Newcastle, Carl's in Newcastle. Hi, Carl.
How are you doing? You all right?
We're all right, thank you.
My question is, at the moment, I'm currently supporting reform. However, the only other party I generally would vote for is yours, Ed. I want to know what I can do for myself as a 30-year-old white male. How can you make me change from voting for Nigel to come to your party? Because in my local area, your Lib Dem councillors are the best in the world, but you as a party just don't hit to me. So I'm just trying to figure out how you can make me move from Nigel to yourself.
Well, thank you, Carl, and thank you for your comments about my colleagues in Newcastle. And that's partly where I'd like to start my answer, actually. Liberal Democrats generally are really good at getting things done in their local area, in their community. We often call ourselves community politicians. We like to get things fixed. In fact, you don't need to take my word for it. It was Kemi Badenoch before the recent local elections who said those Liberal Democrats, they fixed church roofs as if it was some bad thing. You know, we are proud that we trying to bring the community together and to fix things. So that's the first thing I'd say. And I think actually we're better than that than Reform has proven to be, who can be, don't bring people together. And you were seeing in some of the councillors they have elected that they aren't really of the local community. So that's the first thing I'd say to you, Carl. Two other things, which I've talked about earlier, but I want to come back because there's a big divide between the Liberal Democrats and Reform on them. Let me start with NHS and care. Now, I'm not quite sure what today's reform policy is on the NHS. They seem to keep changing it. But I've been in the House of Commons a lot when Nigel Farage and Reform MPs have been asking questions. They don't tend to raise the NHS or care. I think it's a massive issue for millions and millions of people. I think it's one of the biggest issues for millions and millions of people, and they don't seem to address it. And I think that's a big mistake. We are spending a lot of time, a lot of energy holding the Labour government to account. They said they'd clear up the mess in the NHS left by the Conservatives, and they haven't. And it's the Liberal Democrats who are the only opposition party pushing it. Reform are totally silent on it. And then, if I may, Ian, go back to Trump. You know, Nigel Farage is a cheerleader for Donald Trump. He said Putin was the world leader he most respected. So, you know, on those sort of big foreign policy questions, Liberal Democrats differ very much from Nigel Farage and Reform. Now, if you, I don't know, Carl, you might be a big fan of Donald Trump. If you are, maybe you'll stay with Reform. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. I think he is bad news for Americans. I think he's bad news for the world, and that's a big difference between my party and Reform.
Carl, has he won you over?
So Ed, I really do appreciate what you're saying. My only thing is you're a lot better than Kenny, especially, and you're much better than Keir. My only little thing is you speak to a certain way where Nigel hits the people. So, for example, I don't like Donald. Donald's just something else. But the care things you do is amazing. But my situation is what I would like you to do is just speak more to humans. Which, when you're doing your antics, amazing, you're hitting the people. But I feel like you just need to get a little bit more in touch with people like me, who's a floating voter. And you need to get to the point where, for example, Nigel's £20,000 tax relief would work. But except from doing it his way, is doing it right instead of raising it from 12 to 7. You do it to 15, and then 18, then 20. Do you know what I mean? That's what I feel. But I feel like we're getting there. We're definitely getting there.
It's interesting. Carl, that's a really interesting point you make about the income tax allowance, because actually it was the Liberal Democrats who were the first British political party to argue for a big increase in the personal income tax allowance. And when we had a chance, we delivered that. It was a big increase.
It doubled, didn't it?
Yeah, a massive increase. Took lots of low-paid people out of income tax altogether. It was the biggest tax cut for lower middle-income earners that we've seen. And fortunately, since 2015, when the Conservatives were ruling by themselves, one of the ways they shoved up taxes was to freeze the income tax allowance, and that meant that lots of low-paid people were brought into income tax. It was a big tax rise on people who were struggling with the cost of living. I actually think it's one of the reasons why they were voted out, because I think it was a really bad policy. And what's really alarmed me is that with Labour, they've continued that freezing of the income tax allowance. So I don't agree with Reform's approach in the sense that it's I just don't see how they can make their sums add up. I think they're completely wrong in how they've done their sums. But I do think taking low paid out of income tax is the right thing to do. And I'm really proud that we've actually done it.
Carl, thank you very much. Well, here's an anonymous text just saying, well, the way you can beat Nigel Farage, Ed, is to get some charisma.
I don't want the charisma that Nigel Farage has, to be honest.
But he does have this appeal to ordinary people in a way that most politicians don't, doesn't he?
He may do, but because I don't agree with a lot of what he says, I'm not going to copy his style. I was developing my own style, and you may call it charisma or whatever you want to call it, but when I've been knocking on doors in different parts of the country, people actually like the sorts of ways I've been presenting myself. Doing the stunts, they may be controversial with some, but people like the bungee jump and and falling off the paddleboard and the rest of it, and they like this way that I talk about things like care and the real life experiences that many people are experiencing. So I mean, listen, I want to be who I am. I'm not going to try and be someone else. And I hope we get our message across, whether it's at PMQs every week or when we're on the campaign trail.
Well, Simon isn't very impressed by your stance. He says, not a question, but a request for Ed. Next time he jumps off a building, can he pick a higher one? Well, that's cruel, isn't it?
Well, you know, people take that views. That's not the majority response I've had, I have to say.
Right, we'll come to more questions in a moment. Let's get the LBC News at 7:35 with Amelia Cox.
Donald Trump says Vladimir Putin has vowed to respond to an attack on air bases inside Russia by Ukraine. The US president has revealed details of a phone call with his Russian counterpart. The Chancellor has told LBC that she has no intention of repeating tax rises on the scale of last year's budget. Rachel Reeves has also confirmed that more pensioners will be eligible for winter fuel payments later this year. And police searching for a missing British man in Portugal have discovered a body. 38-year-old Greg Monks was reported missing from a stag do in Albufeira a week ago. LBC weather, rain pushing in from the west tonight across southern and central areas. A few scattered showers further north, a low of 4 degrees.
This is LBC. This is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
7:37 on LBC. Ed Davey is here. If you haven't heard of this book, which he's written, it's a really cracking read. Ed and I have talked about his care for his son and indeed his wife on the I think we did an All Talk podcast, didn't we, about 18 months, 2 years ago, which you might want to look up, because you talked about your own life as a carer in an incredibly moving way, and I've heard you do it since then in other interviews too, and I guess that's partly why you wanted to write the book. And if you've got a question on care that you want to ask Ed, we've still got 22 minutes to go, so let's move on and talk to Alistair, who's a new caller in Port Charlotte, in the Isle of Islay. Is that right, Alistair? Good evening.
That's correct. Good evening, and thanks for having me on. I'm a former sub-postmaster, and my office was unfortunately affected by the Horizon scandal. Now, Sir Ed will know, without being reminded, he was Postal Affairs Minister from 2010 to 2012, and with the greatest respect, did not cover himself in glory in that role. He kept many people waiting, and arguably, as far as I'm concerned, was too quick to listen to the advice of Post Office and Royal Mail, and not those sub-postmasters affected. Now, many of we sub-postmasters who were affected by the Horizon scandal are still waiting our compensation. The government's dragging their heels and getting the money we're due. On top of that, many of us have worked for decades without receiving a pension. We won't get a pension for all the work we've done. Now, will the Lib Dem leader commit on air just now to agreeing to paying us a full pension and making sure that we're paid the compensation we're due?
too quick to listen to the advice. Do you think that is a fair accusation?
Well, I'm happy to talk all about this. First of all, I think sub-postmasters have been treated appallingly. Both the actual scandal itself, the way the Horizon system was done by Fujitsu and then the post office, and the lies that the post office told. So postmasters have suffered grievously. And that's why I think Alistair asked a fair question. I absolutely do commit to the compensation, but I hope the government will do it. I mean, the Conservatives messed around. I've been deeply unimpressed by the new government not getting the compensation out to people who absolutely deserve it. And linked to the pension point that Alistair made. Let me go back to my role, though. It hasn't often been reported fully. So Alan Bates wrote to me on the first day of my office, and I wrote back to him with the letter that my officials had drafted saying, look, this is a matter for the post office. Then he wrote back again, pretty angry with me, sending the reply that other ministers had sent him in the past. And that was 2 months in to my office. And I said to my officials, I want to see him. And my officials didn't really want me to see him. And I said, 2 months in, I will see him. And eventually the meeting was set up because over the summer, because we came in the May, and I'd asked for the meeting in July, and it happened 5 months in. And on the eve of that meeting, I got this submission saying, look, all what he's saying, going to tell you is wrong, and here's all the arguments. And I listened to Alan Bates, and I said, I think he's quite a credible guy. I want you to go back and ask the post office, again, all these questions that he's raised about the Horizon, and particularly whether you get entry back into the system, because the question was, could you get remote access to the computer system? And they did go back, and they came up with the same arguments. I was lied to. But I did see Alan Bates. I did ask the questions, and let me just finish this point, Iain. And that's why I campaigned for the inquiry, for the independent inquiry, because not only do I think these sub-postmasters have had such appalling treatment, why they need to know who was responsible for those people to be held to account. I campaigned for that, and I was very keen to give my evidence to the inquiry, because I think it is a scandal on the most appalling scale.
It's quite clear you were lied to. I don't think anybody's taking issue with that. But I think a lot of people will think, well, look, if you found Alan Bates a convincing witness, why would you just rely on your civil servants to be effectively act as a go-between between you and the post office? Why didn't you call in the head of the post office and put all of these points to him or her yourself at that time?
Well, there was a huge number of issues you were dealing with the post office at the time, but I did respond to the meeting with Alan Bates in a way that I don't think any previous minister had done, and said, I want these questions reviewed. Unfortunately, the answers were the same lies. And I think my civil servants were lied to on a scale. And you've seen the senior executives of the post office at the inquiry, that they didn't perform very well, did they?
No.
Let's await the independent inquiry. We'll see what they find. They've spent a long time looking into it. I was really pleased to give evidence to it. I hope it really will hold the people to account. I think people should go to prison, by the way. I think some people have absolutely lied on
all of Reynolds.
I'm not going to comment on individual people. I'll let the inquiry make the final decisions on who was responsible, but there's no doubt this was a scandal on an appalling scale. But to come back to Alistair, people like Alistair need that compensation. They need it yesterday. And there's no excuse for the delays. I have 3 constituents who were affected by the Horizon scandal. I've been pushing their case. I've been shocked by how the post office has delayed the compensation, the sorts of questions they've asked. So there's no doubt this scandal has to be sorted, and the compensation has to be.
But the wider issue here is that as a leader of a party with 72 MPs, you have a possibility at the next election of becoming the official opposition. That's presumably, well, your ambition would be to be Prime Minister, but let's take one step at a time.
I'm happy to take one step at a time.
But do you not think that Alistair would have a right to say, well, Ed Davey, you want to be Prime Minister, you were taken in by the Post Office, you say you were lied to, well, fair enough, but you didn't spot those lies. How are you going to spot Putin's lies? How are you going to deal with people at a much bigger scale who are trying to pull the wool over your eyes? Because this sort of experience, and admittedly it was 10, 15 years ago, but it doesn't inspire confidence, does it?
Well, I think we can all spot Putin's lies. He's lying all the time, and I think I have a track record of calling people out, whether it's Donald Trump and others, which we've talked about. But on this case, let the independent inquiry look at who should have done what when. Its inquiry, I think, should have been set up a long time ago. Let's remember that what happened was a whistleblower. Until we got that Fujitsu whistleblower, first reported in a Panorama programme quite a few years after I left office, and then in 2019, when we got the High Court case, that's when the truth actually came out. But what's a scandal is the High Court judgment was in 2019, and we're 2025. And so
you could have taken up this as a backbench, or were you in Parliament at that point? Because I remember
I was 2 years I was
break.
out of Parliament.
But after 2017, you were back. You could have taken this up as the former minister and made a real big deal of this at the time, but you didn't, and it wasn't until the ITV drama that you started facing questions. And I think in some ways you copped a lot, possibly unjustifiably, most of the flack for that, when there were plenty of other Post Office ministers who did the same.
But I don't know the exact number. It was well into double figures over this very, very long period. But listen, I'm happy to be held to account. It's one of the reasons why I gave my evidence to the inquiry, and let the independent inquiry make the judgments. I mean, that's why you have an independent inquiry. So, I think that there's no doubt that the postmasters were treated appallingly, and there's no doubt the compensation should have already been paid. It is a scandal that's not been paid, and one of the lessons we've got to learn from this, Ian, is we've had too many of these scandals, haven't we? We've had the contaminated blood scandal, we've had the Hillsborough scandal, we've had so many of them, and we have to ask ourselves as a political class to rebuild people's trust in the system. Why aren't they spotted earlier? And I've come to the conclusion that these whistleblowers, because it was the whistleblower who eventually exposed the whole Post Office scandal, they need greater protection. So we've called for an Office of the Whistleblower, independent, properly funded, so that if people know that there are lies being told within their organisation and people are going without the compensation that they should have and are being extremely badly treated because of a big cover-up, then that statutory office protected by law can help those people and help those people come forward, when coming forward is a very brave thing to do.
Alistair, let me bring you back briefly because we have to go to a break, but are you satisfied with what you've heard?
Well, I've emailed Ed directly, and himself or one of his team has responded. But again, inquiries, promises, speeches, they're all very well and good. But what we really need is real action, compensation paid. And again, there was some dancing around the pension argument. The current Post Office minister who I've contacted refused to commit to it, saying that Royal Mail is private. I was 12 years in a post office that cost me an absolute fortune through the Horizon scandal, and we're not even given a pension for all those years of work. And it does seem like when government or when MPs are in opposition, they promise the earth. And when they become in government, they're unfortunately very similar to the last bunch of people who did not deliver. So what we really need from all our MPs is action. And Sir Ed is more than welcome to respond to my email. I mean, he has an email chain. We've been corresponding. And if he wants me to speak in front of a select committee, I'm more than happy to do it. But there has to be action. Parliamentary inquiries, whether they be independent or not, is all very well and good. But a lot of our sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses are quite elderly. and they may die before they receive compensation, which is tragic. Some of them have already died. Some have committed suicide.
It's not just tragic. That is part of the scandal, isn't it? Alistair, thank you so much for phoning in. We'll come to more calls in just a moment. It's 7:49.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
So let's tell you the story of a former hero police officer who's now lost his job. Lorne Castle was dismissed from the force for gross misconduct after failing to treat a 15-year-old boy with courtesy and respect. A Stanley-like knife had fallen from the youth's waistband during his arrest. Here is the incident in question.
Right, stop resisting or I'm going to smash you, do you understand? Put your hand behind your back.
Players in Wimbledon.
What are you doing with the knife in his pocket? Why on earth did he have it? The police did absolutely nothing wrong. That's good old-fashioned policing.
James in Swansea.
This is absurd. I can't believe that the man's been sacked. We've just been taught that until he's detained properly, you have to do everything within your power to eliminate that threat.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio, on Global Player, and the new LBC. Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
7:52 here on LBC. Let's go to more calls to Sir Ed Davey. James is in air. Hello, James.
Yeah, hello, Ian. Good evening, Mr. Davey. It's really nice to speak to you.
No, come on, Sir Ed. Give him his proper title.
Oh, sorry.
Go on, James.
I beg your pardon.
Just call me Ed, James. I'm quite happy with that.
Okay. Okay then. Ed, at the last election, the Liberal Party did very well. It did well nationwide, but it did particularly well in some of those seats which had been Conservative for a long, long time. I've got two questions for that. One's kind of smaller, and the second one's a bigger question. The first smaller question is, can you formulate policies to hold on to those seats that you won? The big question is, I think the Conservative Party is now under an existential threat, and I think that yourself and Reform are now fighting for the non-Labour vote. And I wonder if you can see the potential for the Liberal Party to actually become a much, much larger party in the next 5 to 10 years, particularly with Reform, who many Conservatives just do not want to vote for. And I wondered if you could actually speak to that kind of bigger picture as well.
James, thank you very much for that question. You're right, we did win a lot of seats from the Conservatives the last election, and your small questions, you called it, can we design policies for those sorts of people? I would argue we have done, and we need to do more of it. So at the last election, we did a lot on health and care. It was right at the front of our election campaign, and I always think health and care issues affect everybody. It doesn't matter what your political background is, you need to make sure you can see a GP, you can have a dentist, and so on. I think where we need to do more work, because the economic policy situation is always changing, is on the cost of living. The cost of living is hitting so many people, and I want us to develop policies which I feel, yes, to former Conservatives, but to everyone, frankly, who is worried about making ends meet, because I think lots of people are struggling out there. Your sort of bigger question, which was, could we become a much bigger party given the way that the Conservatives are, becoming a bit of an irrelevance in many areas? The answer is yes, we can. And I really want to make that happen. We just had our best result for over 100 years. We did pretty well in the local elections. Obviously, the headlines were over reform, but we actually did really, really, really well, better than we expected. And I think we will grow and grow. And there's a long time between now and the next general election. Obviously, everyone at the moment is talking about reform and Nigel Farage, but I don't think that means we know the result of the next election yet. I mean, if you'd talked to me in 2020, Iain, and said...
Which I'm sure I did.
Well, you're sure you did. But if I told you we were going to get 72 seats, you'd have...
I would have laughed in your face.
You'd have laughed in my face. But we got 72 seats. And my point, James...
How many were you expecting at the last election?
Well, it depends on when you ask. Back in 2020...
All right, at the beginning of the election campaign in 2024, what were you aiming for?
Well, I can tell you what I did on the eve of the poll. Well, actually, on polling day itself, I was at home getting a bit of R&R before the post-election fandango. And I said to Emily, my wife, this is before the poll came out, which was taken by the BBC, to the exit poll. And I said, I think we might win 50 seats if we have a really good night. So I could sense things were going well. I didn't think 50 at the start of the campaign.
No.
Probably more sort of 30, 35. The campaign went really well for us, including the stunts. That helped. And
including winning Tunbridge Wells.
Including winning Tunbridge Wells, the great Mike Martin MP. But I thought by the end of the campaign we could get as much as 50, and then we got 72. So it was great. And going back to James, I think if we project our policies that relate to people out there, whether it's on health and care, whether it's on the costs of living, whether it's on issues like sewage, which we talk a lot about, we will develop policies, I think, between now and the election, which will appeal not just to former Conservative voters, but people who are very disappointed in Labour, and even people who might be attracted to reform. Because I think some of the reform vote is just fed up of politicians. I think it doesn't trust politicians, and who can blame them? And I think if we can show that we have been listening to people, we can rebuild that trust, and I think we could surprise people the next election.
Right, let's squeeze in one more question from Mary in Cambridge. Mary, hi.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, I wanted to ask Ed, in the aftermath of the Supreme Court ruling that according to the Equality Act, a woman is a biological woman, what is Ed Davey going to do about his policies within the Lib Dem party? Because as far as I can see, you're all over the place on what it is to mean to be a woman. So what's your response? Okay. I mean, previously you said to me...
Mary, we've only got a minute left, so I'm going to have to let Ed answer the question.
Well, Mary, thank you very much for your question. I hope you would expect that the Liberal Democrats accept the ruling of a court. We believe in the rule of law, and the Supreme Court has looked at this question with respect to the equality.
It's torpedoed your party's official policy,
I'm not sure if it has, but let me finish my argument. And we've accepted that ruling. And the ruling essentially says that the Gender Recognition Act stays, that a trans woman is a woman, except for the purpose of the Equalities Act. And again, we completely accept that. It's the ruling of the court. The challenge now, Mary, for all political parties, not just Liberal Democrats, is how we actually implement that. Now, the regulator, the Equalities Commission, has got to put some guidance. It's had some draft guidance. It's got to complete it because it's got to help all people in society, particularly businesses and organisations, manage the implementation of that ruling. And I think the only way we're going to do that, frankly, is by having a proper debate in Parliament.
But your party has expelled people for saying that a trans woman is not a woman.
Well, listen, I think many of us, over quite a few years of this debate, have learnt a lot. And it's not just my party. All the political parties have struggled with some of these issues. Dare I say, people in the media have, the BBC have, businesses have. And I'm sure along the way we've made mistakes. But now we have the Supreme Court. We've now got to work out how to implement that ruling so we can protect people, protect women, protect trans people. I mean, this is all about respecting people and making sure they are safe.
But you are going to revise your party's policies.
Well, I think we should have a debate in Parliament. I don't necessarily think that means we should need to change our policies, but what I do think we need to do is make sure we uphold the law and help people understand how they can enact that law.
We have to stop there because you'll be eating into the time of your fellow Liberal Democrat, Lisa Smart, in a moment.
She's
and you
fantastic.
wouldn't want to do that, would you? Ed Davey, thank you very much indeed for spending the last hour with us here on LBC. Coming up in the next hour, it is Wednesday's edition of Cross Question. Baroness Amanda Spielman, Conservative peer, former Chief Inspector of the Schools Regulator Ofsted, will be with us. Tan Dessy, Labour MP for Slough, who's Chair of the Defence Select Committee. Lisa Smart, Liberal Democrat Home Affairs spokesperson and MP for Hazel Grove. And Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor. They're going to be here to answer your questions. We've cleared the board. It's open for your questions on 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's